Is it? Oh, here we go. Wonderful. My name is Milana Kneževic. I'm a climate journalist at NRK News in Oslo. So for those who don't know, NRK is Norway's public broadcaster and biggest media outlet. We cover news across TV, radio, podcasts, online, social media, everything except print, I think. And since 2020, NRK has had its own climate team and has had a strategic investment in climate journalism. And since then, our climate coverage has improved dramatically. We have attracted big audiences, we've won awards, and we've contributed to the public discourse. So, you know, that's big talk for me. So I'm gonna start with some numbers to back that up because, you know, I know clicks is not the most important thing, but we are journalists. We want people to read our stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. So just the context, you know, Norway's a small country. We're 5 million people, so that's the scale of these numbers. So this is just a few of our most read stories. This is a story about the Doomsday Vault on Svalbard, where the world's seeds are kept. This is a story just from yesterday or the day before, I think, about how Norwegians' favorite holiday destinations in Southern Europe are going to be really, really hot this summer. This is a story about how Norwegian glaciers are melting. This is a story about the huge methane leak that came from the Nord Stream pipeline incident. And this is a big feature story we did about just the general really bad state of our ocean. So how did NRK get here? I'm going to talk about the story behind our climate strategy, why we did it and what we did, the ways that we've improved, and I have some myths that I want to bust for you, and then I'm going to have some concluding remarks. So to explain all of this, we have to go back in time a bit. So the year is 2015, you know, the UK is still in the EU. Taylor Swift has only released 5 albums at this point, you know, so it's a very different world. And at that point, a young, bright-eyed Milana has just started working at NRK. And I'm really into climate and environment. So me and a colleague got to go to do a story on methane emissions from cows and how there are possible solutions from this. And that was really fun. But then that was kind of it. I didn't really cover climate for a long while after that. It was just a coincidence that I was chosen for this story. And after that, other news, other topics were prioritized. And that was the experience for most journalists at NRK for a really long time. Then in 2018, something big happened. This is a photo from NRK's big climate strategy meeting. We did a big survey among our audiences about our blind spots. What topics are we not covering well enough? And the number one topic was climate change. Audiences said that they want more climate stories and that NRK is simply not good enough. So, what do we do about that? This group of people from all over NRK were chosen to find answers. And almost none of them had previous experience with climate journalists, which I think was kind of important for the credibility of this project. First of all, they looked for the causes. They found that no one editorial groups were responsible for climate as a subject. The stories that were told were very coincidental and random and the results of individual reporters' ideas and initiatives. And stories on issues like crime and health were a lot easier to pitch and make, so those stories were prioritized. The question was then, how should we overcome these difficulties? They ended up having some really tough but really important discussions. What does our audience need? What does climate even mean? How do we define it? It's such a huge field, we can't possibly cover everything. Do we need specialist reporters or all-rounders? This is a complex field, we need expertise, but at the same time, all journalists need to have some responsibility because climate intersects with everything. Should we produce more stories or fewer and better stories? Should we tell the grim reality of how bad things are, or should we strive to give people hope? How to balance those two. And then, you know, the ethics. what does balance and objectivity mean when it comes to climate issues? And finally, what do we actually want to achieve? Do we aim to trigger action? And when do we cross the line and become activists? So, a lot of big, tough questions and discussions. To make a very long story short, the group ended up with 3 main recommendations. Number 1, all editorial groups should have some responsibility for covering climate through their perspective and their lens. But we also need a dedicated group to tell the stories that would otherwise not be told. And we also need some sort of guideline to help leaders and journalists make good decisions on climate coverage every day. So a very crucial point was that we, the top management of NRK, participated in the debates and felt ownership over this whole process. This is our Director General at the time. He was head of all of NRK, and he approved this plan. And he said the risk of losing legitimacy is bigger if we don't do this than if we do this. So in cooperation with him and his chief editors, a content guide was made. And this was inspired by similar content guide from the BBC earlier. So this is what we agreed on. This guide has been very useful for us in our everyday journalism. It's made us safer in making decisions and also when getting criticism. This is long, so I don't have time to go through all of it, but some important sections. We should aim for a broad audience. We are fact-based, so we use the prevailing science as our starting point. And this is an important section. The important societal debates today are about how to limit or adapt to global warming. So our coverage should primarily be about how action is taken, not whether, if action is necessary. And the guide also said that we have to be conscious about false balance. So we should not give too much attention to those who deny climate science. It's just important to mention that right now, our climate editors are working on an updated strategy because the world has changed a lot in the past 4 years. Climate change is happening faster. We see extreme weather, heat waves in Europe every year now. And there's a new IPCC report, so even more science. And in 2019, false balance was a challenge for us. It's not so much that today. So practically, we ended up founding a climate team that consists of 2 groups. One news team based in Oslo, which I'm a part of, and one long-form features investigative team that's based in Bergen. So what has improved after all this work? Number 1, it is a lot less lonely to be a climate journalist. Here is our current team from Bergen and Oslo together. So no longer are random individual journalists responsible for this huge complex issue alone, but rather a team works together systematically over time to build knowledge and confidence together. And this has been noticed by those in power. This is our former climate minister, Sveinung Rotevatn, who basically says, telling editors, don't start a climate team because that just means that I get more difficult questions. We've also become a hub for sharing knowledge with other parts of NRK. So to work with them and to support them when they cover climate change through their perspective and in their context. So here's a story the sports team made about the emissions from our Norwegian professional ski team. So we are also much more prepared for those big breaking climate stories. Back in 2018, when the special report on 1.5 degrees came out, my colleague Astrid wrote this story all alone. She was at a seminar with the entertainment division in NRK and just had to write this on the floor in the hall in between other sessions when she just had some spare time. Whereas this is the latest IPCC report. When they presented this, we had a plan and we ensured full coverage on radio, TV, online from morning till evening. Also, one of the IPCC reports came out right after the invasion of Ukraine. If we didn't have a climate team, it would have been very easy to drop this and put all the reporters on working on the war. But because we had our team in place with a clear mandate, our good colleagues covered the war, and we covered the IPCC report the same day. And that ended up being one of the most read stories for NRK that whole day. And also, having this team makes us better prepared for these other big overarching stories that have the climate perspective, like, the US election, what does that mean for climate? The pandemic, how does that connect to climate? The role of fossil fuels in Russia's invasion. So we have that lens. We're stronger on our own unique creative ideas. We still make story and cover stories like this. This is important, about, climate facts, climate data. This is a story about, the record ocean heat that we've been seeing over the past few months. But we are also much more selective in the stories we tell now. So we don't just end up, with 5 almost identical stories in a row about yet another report that says, again, things are really bad, because naturally, audiences might tire of that. Instead, we are more proactive and less reactive in our journalism. We do more stories like this, for instance, investigating how the forestry industry might be overstating the forest as a climate solution in Norway. We've made stories about the rise of, the controversial weather modifications to stop climate change, and an in-depth story on offshore wind, which Norway is really late in developing compared to other countries. Because, we've built experience, expertise, sources that trust us, so we find those more exclusive, unique, interesting stories and angles based on our own investigations. Because climate change is so huge, it's impossible to cover everything, so we make an effort to do fewer stories, but to do them bigger and better. We're also just better storytellers. We're more confident in writing and explaining clearly and simply these difficult issues because we now know the topic much better because we work on it consistently and systematically. So, whereas before, the visuals were almost like an afterthought at the end. So like, oh shit, we need a picture. Where's that sad polar bear? Or, the smoke coming out of the pipes. Whereas now we spend a lot of time and effort to make stories, visually striking and interesting. Because when you think about it, climate is a really visual topic. We've taken people down into the deepest ocean. We've taken them over spectacular Norwegian glaciers. We've taken them inside the garbage machines that are destroyed by all of the clothes that we throw away. We've shown the traces of people who fought for their lives in a house hit by catastrophic flooding. We show the animals affected, and we show people, we center the humans in our story because climate is also a deeply human story. Because we can see that our audiences want good visual storytelling because it can make a difficult subject more engaging, feel closer, and also easier to understand. And our journalism has had a lot more impact on the national discourse. So when the Climate Newsroom first started, we did a big project on wetlands. Peatlands, bogs. I don't know what the best English translation, but the wetlands. Because it's a potentially really effective and cheap climate solution. As long as you just leave them alone, they're huge carbon sinks. But then they're also potential carbon bombs if you ruin them or dig them up. So we did a story on how Norway is spending money to restore some wetlands while simultaneously continuing to destroy loads of others. And then my colleagues followed up with a story about how this big motorway project was going to destroy loads more wetlands, but nobody had even thought about that and had no idea how much CO2 that would release. And a little while later, the government put through a law banning digging in certain peatlands. And then this became a bit of a political football because the new government removed that law, but then they put in place another law. So now, there is some protections in place. But the point is, we really put wetlands on the national agenda in a way that it has never been before, I would venture, because we were a group working really systematically on this issue. And now I just want to mention some myths that we hear a lot. Number 1, nobody's interested in climate change. Audiences don't want climate stories. I mean, that is just, in our experience, completely untrue. This graph, I didn't have the time to pull the latest month's numbers, but the dark blue line is our climate, the light blue line on top is our climate stories, and the dark blue line below is the average story on NRK. So that tells its own story. And we've seen that it's not like even one single type of story that cracks the code. Again, I'll show you some more of our most read stories. Everything from the Norwegian oil industry, to the link between the pandemic and climate change, to online shopping, to climate demonstrations and climate summits, to deep sea mining. Here we had one of our famous weathermen doing a report for August 2015. We've done even a story on regenerative farming. So the fact is, everything from good news and solutions to really depressing stuff can get a lot of attention. The fact is, as long as you make good journalism, people will read, listen, and watch it. Myth number 2, climate journalism is activism. Again, not true. The fact is that covering climate change is just like covering any other topic. Most large media have dedicated teams to cover politics, foreign news, sports. It's no more activist to have a dedicated team to report on climate change, because climate change tends to fall between the cracks in these more traditional types of news teams, because few climate stories are simply just a political story or just a foreign affairs story or just a sports story. It's interdisciplinary, so we need to have that interdisciplinary climate team in place. Because we've actually found that the problem is more the opposite. Without a dedicated team, climate coverage tends again to be left to the efforts from individual reporters here and there. And they have the best intentions. I was one of them, but they lack that important editorial, structural support. And being alone and covering this huge, difficult topic is hard. It's really, really hard. And it's that is when you're kind of more vulnerable to poor editorial decisions or priorities. To conclude, NRK are certainly not perfect, and we have a lot of room for improvement. But we have made really huge steps. And I know because I was there before we started the climate team, and I'm there now, and I can see the change in my everyday life as a journalist. And the harsh truth is, as we've discovered, if the audiences are not reading our stories, it's not their fault, it's our fault, and we need to do a better job. And I'm not saying that this is the only way of doing this, but it's the way that it's worked for us, to have that proper structure and clearly prioritize climate. I fully understand that in different countries and different media outlets exist in different contexts. We all have different challenges, funding, everything. But I guess the main thing I would want you to take away from this is that if you want to do climate change journalism well, you need to make an effort. You need to prioritize, because it's just not going to happen on its own. I, again, understand that we live in these really uncertain times with loads of crises happening all at once. But climate change is the biggest kind of collective challenge facing us as a planet. And, just because other crises are happening, climate change isn't going away. It's always there on top of everything else. And even if we hit all of our most ambitious climate targets, 1.5 degrees everything, things are going to get worse. The extreme weather we're seeing now is in a planet that's only been warmed 1.1 degrees, so things are going to get worse. And I firmly believe that it is our great responsibility as journalists to cover that properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Milana Kneževic. You're so engaged in the subject. Excellent. Now I'm going to ask you for 5 minutes break, but don't go anywhere. We just need to pin microphones to our next speakers, all right? I cannot see. Someone in the back?
But is it a struggle to make it journalism and to keep away from activism?
I would say for us, it really isn't. I mean, because it's just, you follow the exact same rules that we follow when we cover any other topic. So it really has never been an issue for us.
I'm asking this because climate change is something that hits everybody. also you, also your colleagues. So you could be close to activism instead of being close to journalism. It's a threat, I think, sometimes.
But I think you can also say that about a lot of other issues. You know, if you're a political journalist covering like maternity leave and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, sports journalism.
Yeah, sports. Yeah, so I think, you know, we're all human beings. We all strive for objectivity, but you know, we have our emotions and our feeling and everything. But I think it's just, it really hasn't been an issue for us as long as we just follow the exact same rules that we follow when covering any other issues. And we have a really kind of collaborative team, a good team feeling. We sit and we discuss things and we figure out, you know, how to best cover things in a kind of an objective and balanced way. So it's really been, honestly, I haven't felt that struggle at all.
Can I answer to this question too? Yeah. Just, I share totally what you've said, but we never ask to a sport journalist if he loves too much sport. We never ask to a business journalist if he loves too much companies. Why would there be a specificity for climate change coverage journalists? That's very interesting.
I do ask that too much sports journalism.
Okay, yeah, no, but that's very interesting because the issue is so big that, of course, we are in contact with activists, but we are in contact with all the stakeholders of the climate change issue. And as you say, Milena, we just have to have our professional reflex. You know, as journalists, we are persons, so we have opinions. And when you are working as journalists, we have to move and do our job and see all stakeholders, and then to be as much honest as possible on what we have collected from our sources.
Big compliment to NRK how you're working on this.
Thank
Very
you.
Good.
Big compliment.
Yeah.
Any other questions? As long as we have our guest still with us.
Just, you can, if you want, like any of the slides that I showed about our climate strategy or anything like that, just like let me know. I can send it to whoever. Just come up and say hi.
Yeah. Thank you, ladies. Yeah. Dobrze, to teraz let's go over there.